Hello everyone and welcome to a new tutorial. You've all been waiting so long for the Dreamcatcher. This is kind of a big project, so we're going to be doing it in two parts. I got the idea for this from my husband, who is a big fan of Navajo beadwork. He has a beautiful beaded sash that he keeps on the wall in our log home, and I love the colors from it, and he asked me to do a Dreamcatcher. The Chippewa tradition of a Dreamcatcher, the mother or a grandmother would make a willow hoop and weave the inside, and then the strings hanging down would hold a bead and a feather, and the dreams would pass through the center and go down through the beads. The bad dreams get caught in the beads and burned up in the morning sun, and then the good dreams pass through the feathers down to a sleeping child. So it's really a gift of love. So let's get started on this project. I'm using a 16 by 20 canvas. This one happened to be black. It's just what I had. I've already made these on a white canvas too, using the same process. So I've got two colors of brown here in brown satin, and I'm just gonna squirt them on here and use a brush and start blending that out all the way to the edges, getting on the edges there, making sure those are covered as well. And then I'm going to add a little bit of black satin to make some streaks. My goal here is to kind of make it look like a plank of wood. So I just keep blending, but I'm not really blending it all together. I'm leaving the stripes in there. And while it's wet, I'm moving the paint around, going to give it a couple swirls here and then go over it again in straight lines, just to make it look like wood grain. And then we're going to let this dry. And while that is drying, let's talk a little bit about the turquoise paint. We're going to be using this color in a lot in this project. So I'm going to just show you 4 different craft paints, and let's look at the texture and the color. This is the Martha Stewart Pond, and you know I like the Martha Stewart colors, but I wanted to try some other crafts paints because some of you don't have access to the Martha Stewart. So we've got an Americana, a Folkart, and a Craft Smart paint, and you can see they're very different thicknesses. So what happens when you use a tool straight out of the bottle with these? You can see that they're going to leave a little bit different dots. And this is some of the problem that people have been having in following my tutorials. Their dots don't look right. And that's what happens when you use a craft paint and it's not the right consistency. The Martha Stewart's pretty good, that's why I like using it. Some paints are too thin, they leave a well in the center, and some are too thick and they leave it really bumpy. So a lot of people will add a medium. I use the titanium white. A lot of people will use this gloss medium to thin their paints. And I think it does a really good job of thinning the paint. But the problem with it is that it can leave your paint a little transparent and you lose some of the color saturation when you use the gloss medium. So when it dries, it's really not as much of a pop of color. You can also see there's little tiny bubbles on the edge of those dots, and that's because the gloss medium created the bubbles. And so then you get kind of a ragged edge on the dot. So what happens when you use the golden fluid titanium white instead as a mixing medium? I'm using it in that very thick chunky paint, and this is what it looks like. It really does a good job in thinning the paint and making it the right consistency, but you see that it is a couple shades lighter. So that's why I add a golden fluid color. And for turquoise, I really like the Phthalo blue in the green shade. So I'm just added 1 drop here, and I'm going to mix it up, and you can see that not only will the paint be the right consistency now, but it will be the right color. And that is why I'm always telling you I add the golden fluid titanium white to thin my paints, and then I add a little bit of their golden fluid color to boost the pigment saturation. And you can see when these are dry now, the center of the paint that was too thin is leaving kind of a caved-in volcano. So let's make the grid. This is dry now. We know it's 16 inches across, so 8 inches would be halfway across. I'm going to mark that 8-inch mark with a General's charcoal white pencil and then connect that line with a yardstick. So now we have the center of our canvas. I'm going to mark 6.5 inches down, and that is going to be the center of our mandala. I used a compass to draw a 3.5-inch circle, and then a 7.5-inch circle, and then a 10.5-inch circle. And my compass wouldn't go any bigger, so I pulled out my embroidery hoop here, the biggest one I had, 13.5 inches, to do the final circle as a guideline. There. Now I'm cutting a 7.5-inch paper circle. You know how I like to use paper to help me with my patterns because it's cheap and easy. We're going to fold it in half 3 times. And then snip off the end and place that right over the center where our mandala is going to be, and line up that fold with the straight guideline. And then mark each of the fold lines. And this is going to give us our grid. It's hard to make a grid on a rectangular canvas, and this is one way to do it. So we're just going to connect those, and we will have the basic grid for our design. Now I want to make some petal shapes, and again I'm going to use paper to do the petal shapes. It's hard for me to freehand them and get them all exactly the same shape. So I'm marking halfway between a segment, and I'm going to get a little piece of cardstock here and then mark those lines and where that underline is, and then I'm going to fold it in half and then connect those lines in kind of a gentle S shape, cut it out, and then that's going to be my little stencil to do my pencil shape here on the petals. And I'm going to do that on each of the segments, lining up the fold of the paper with the guideline. And some of you have asked the equivalency between the Crystal Light crochet hooks and the Pittsburgh 28-piece transfer punch set. So I'm just putting them on a piece of paper here from smallest to largest, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see the size equivalents that are written on the packages, in case I'm not sure which sets you have. But those are the equivalents, and these are the paints I'll be using. I'll be listing those in the comments. Basically, we're going to start out with 3 shades of brown, 2 shades of turquoise, and white. So I'm starting off with the turquoise tool for our center dot in the lightest shade of brown. Wipe it off on a damp paper towel. Now I'm using my manicure stylus just to swirl on that. I had a little bit of a peak, and I know I'm going to do a top dot on that center dot, so I wanted it to sit down and dry flat. So now I'm putting a small dot on each of the guidelines in the darkest shade of brown. Zoom in on it there so you can see it. Okay, and now I'm going to the smallest tool in the Red Heart Crystal Light crochet hook set and putting another dot in the dark brown, and then I'm moving up a size to the red tool to make another dot, and then moving up a size to the yellow tool in the same color on the guidelines. And try and get these as close as you can without touching. Now I'm just kind of measuring here. I'm not sure which tool is going to fit in that space, and I decided that the manicure stylus was best to fit that in there in between those first 2 dark brown dots. I want it to be snug but not touching. And much depends on the thickness of your paint. Some paints want to pull out a little bit more and you'll need more space. This paint's pretty thick, so I knew it was okay. So I'm measuring again, trying to decide which tool is going to fit in there. And I decided the orange one was the best, and then went back to the blue. And I'm pushing down those peaks again. They were a little bit too high. Now I'm measuring again, trying to figure out what's going to fit in the space. I want to go around this center circle in white, but I'm not sure how many dots I want to make and what's going to fit. So I'm using the yellow tool to put a dot on each of the guidelines in the white. And then I'm going to I think 3 will fit in here, so I'm just going to put 1 in the middle and then see if I can snug in 1 on either side. And it just fits. As long as I don't push too hard, I can make them all fit without touching. Okay, I'm going to give that a shot with a blow dryer just so I don't smudge it when I bump it. And I'm using the smallest tool in my bright turquoise to finish up that row. Now I'm to my red paint. I'm using a gloss paint here because I want these to look like beads with the green tool on the guidelines. Then I'm moving to the red tool and to the small blue tool. And then I'm going to be walking that out 3 dots with the manicure stylus. Just staying right on those guidelines to get nice straight angles. And I'm finishing that row with the green tool in the light brown paint. And that should get me to the next circle. Now I'm using the orange tool to put a dot on either side of the red point, and then the blue tool, and then I'm going to walk those down with the smallest tool. And just a gentle curve. It was a small enough space that I thought I could do it without having to draw it out with a stencil. Now I'm putting a larger dot here, right where those 2 petals meet. I'm going to put the 3rd dot. I'm trying to figure out how many will fit there again. And I've decided not to make these dots as close as they were on the white ring. I want to leave a little space. So I put 1 on the end of each petal, and then I'm putting 1 where the 2 petals meet for the next row. And then I'm just going to put 1 dot on either side, leaving space. But I want to make sure this looks consistent, that the space between the dots looks the same. So I'm lining it up where those petals meet and then putting 1 on either side and doing that all the way around. And then I'm filling in that space with a small white dot, just to give it a little variety. I try and do something different on each row. So now I'm using the lavender tool with my turquoise, putting a blue dot in between the light brown petals and snugging it in there as close as I can, and then I'm putting a small turquoise dot at the top of that to fill up that space. Now I'm using the small tool in the white to walk dots around the turquoise dot. We'll do that all the way around. And I'm mixing up some light turquoise. This is a lighter shade we haven't used yet. And I'm going to walk those around. Then I'm going to add a little bit of this sour apple in there just to give us a little different shade of turquoise. Some turquoise is very blue and some has a little bit of a green shade. So I thought I'd just add this on this row and walk those around. Now I'm adding my golden fluid Phthalo blue green shade to really boost the color of my turquoise. I added about 3 drops here to make it very vibrant. And I'm going to be starting on the outer petals using the larger blue tool on the point. You can see how beautiful that turquoise is. And then we're just going down a size with each dot around the outside of that guideline for the petals. Using the orange tool there. and then moving down to the blue tool. And just take your time on these. You want to stay right on those guidelines. You don't want to bump anything with your hand. Turn the canvas if you need to, and then finish up those rows walking out smaller dots with the manicure stylus all the way to the brown dot. Now I'm using the lighter shade of blue that we mixed up at the beginning, starting with the green tool, putting a light blue dot in that space as close as we can without touching. And we're going to start walking those down using smaller tools with each row. From the orange to the blue and then to the manicure stylus to finish out walking those dots. And that will give us the interior of our design. Isn't that a pretty curve? I just love the design of this. I like the shape of it. So this is the end of part 1. Stay tuned.